Hey, music director or worship leader, what is your stance on backing tracks? Do you use them? If so, why, how, and when do you use them? In today's episode, I give my practical approach on how I use tracks in corporate worship. And disclaimer here, I promise I don't wear this shirt all the time. I happen to realize as I hit record, I wore this shirt in the last episode, but that was 2 weeks ago. So I promise I don't wear this shirt all the time. So let's just kind of look at some practical approaches to utilizing and using tracks in corporate worship. Well, I'm glad that you are joining with me. My name is Curtis, and I'm your host of the Curtis Biswell Show and Biswell Coaching, where my vision and what I'm about is creating a thriving community where worshipers are raised up in character, competence, and cognitive health so that we can empower local churches and colleges and communities to flourish, or whatever your context is, to flourish. So I just recently put out a course, my first course, and I'm going to be pushing that in this episode. But it is leading worship with tracks. And I get this, I kind of hear this a lot. I'm in these worship leader networks and gatherings and fellowships and coffees and what have you. And a lot of times we're talking ins and outs and like, hey, what's working for you? And so I get kind of this question asked a lot. Do you guys use tracks? And honestly, we've come a long ways. I feel like tracks and backing tracks have kind of gotten a bad rap. And I think we've thought that they were something that they weren't, or we've thought that they were limiting. So I just wanted to kind of debunk some of that for you. If you're kind of on the fence of like, man, I just don't know how I feel about it. This could be an old conversation, but maybe not. Like, I know I'm working with one client right now, a coaching client, and they are just getting started in using tracks in their corporate expression of worship. And so a lot of the things that we have heard, or I have heard in the past, is tracks make you feel less authentic, or they just are fake, which I guess is similar to less authentic. But like, can I just push back a little bit? And again, full disclaimer, if you don't use tracks in your Sunday morning corporate worship expressions, that's fine. Like it's not to say that you have to do this in order to be a successful worship leader. By all means, I hope you don't hear that. But I wanted to maybe like hopefully debunk some of the misconceptions that tracks is. And that first one was less authentic, or it makes you feel fake. As I was reflecting, didn't we not all do this? And maybe some of our churches still. Like, I remember growing up in church, and there was a slot in the service where you know what I'm talking about. It was the special music. I'm using air quotes. I don't know. But it was the special music, and I participated in that a lot. And how did we typically do those? Was we sang to a backing track, like an accompaniment track is what they were called. And so we would go to Mardell or your family Christian bookstore, and you would buy that accompany track to the song that you really liked, made popular by your favorite artist, whatever. And you would go sing that in your church as a special song. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even if you still do that to this day, there's nothing wrong with that. And hopefully I'm not trying to make this comparison stretch, but like that's essentially what backing tracks are. And yet they are a lot more customizable these days. Whereas that you popped in your cassette tape or your CD and all you had control over was the volume up and down. Well, we've come a long ways. So some of the benefits that I want to talk about is filling in the spots. Okay. Maybe you're just starting out or you're trying to grow your team. And maybe right now it's just you and the acoustic guitar. First of all, I want you to hear me say, let's not define the success of our worship. Okay. I'm quoting worship because a lot of times we compartmentalize that to the 4 songs we do on Sunday, and that's our worship. When it's so much more than that. You don't have to have this full band to have an engaging, high quality, excellent form of worship. Okay. I think we know that, but I want to make sure we remember that, because here's the deal is, unfortunately, when COVID hit a few years ago, it did some good things for the church, but it also did some negative things for the church, meaning it intensified our comparison trap, where we started looking at like the big churches and how they do live, right? And how their live services look, their live streaming. And we were like, that's the gauge for what ours needs to sound like and look like. And we've done that also in our worship leadership and our Sunday morning expression of worship. Like we say, okay, well, Elevation, I just love it when Elevation leads music and they have like 20 musicians on stage and pro audio, pro lights, visual effects, extra elements. And I'm moved by that. So how do I recreate that to create that same movement? When I've been in like one of my favorite concerts of all time, and I call it a concert, it really was a worship service, was the Shanes. Shane and Shane. I went and saw them at a church here locally in Kansas City area years ago. It was just one guy on the acoustic, 2 singers, and their drummer that has this makeshift kit that's not even a full kit. So instrumentally, just an acoustic and a drummer. Vocally, 2 vocalists. Excellent. Moving, powerful, so let's not define by what we have and what we don't have. But my point in this is, as you're growing the team, maybe you are looking for that fuller sound in your corporate worship, and you're tired of just the piano and you every Sunday, or just the guitar and you, or maybe you have the guitar and a piano and you, or guitar and bass, and you're wanting more tastefully done. This is a way to start filling in those spots while you're growing and you're trying to grow your team instrumentally, vocally, whatever. This is a way to fill in the spots. Another benefit that I see of using tracks is improving your musicianship. So why should you play with a click? I mean, if you ever took guitar lessons, piano lessons, I bet you your instructor, your teacher, what were they telling you to practice with? A metronome, because you had to start learning the rhythm and keeping proper time. Why have we separated the approach we take to our craft and our instrument? Why have we separated that? And we've kind of thrown a lot of that stuff out the window when it comes to Sunday morning worship. It's almost like we're saying, well, that was important to learn the instrument, but now that we are in a live environment, I don't think it's important. Here's one that I love. It's like, it's just, it's so distracting. It takes me out of worship and it's just distracting. Okay. Yes, maybe at first. Can I pull back the curtain a little bit and be real and open and honest with you guys? I remember to this day, I thought I was really early on in my leading, but I had been playing guitar for maybe 3 to 4 years, which isn't really that long, but I'm growing. I'm getting more competent. We're building a band. People seem to be engaged in the Sunday morning expression of worship. I bring in a buddy. He's in town to visit one week, and he's an excellent drummer, friend of mine. He comes and plays drums for us at my church that I'm leading at. And he asks me, he says, "Hey, do you want me to throw on a click?" So, meaning he had a way to feed it in his ears, or at least have something to look at, and then he would be the timekeeper. Because here's another misconception. Well, the drummer is our metronome. Okay, what if the drummer can't keep time? Well, oh yeah, all drummers keep time. I could tell countless stories, and I'm not going to do that because I don't want to throw shade. But this was a frustrating experience to me because I said, I said, yeah, I want to play on time. So you throw it on. We start fighting, not literally fighting, but like, I don't remember if I was slowing up. I think I was speeding up, and I felt like he was slowing down. I think that's what it was. That's typically how it worked for me. And I find myself getting frustrated. I'm like, I quickly realized I can't keep time like I thought I could because I never had it in my ear. And still in that moment, I didn't have it in my ear, but the guy that was following it, trying to right the ship for us, the rest of the band was fighting that. And so in that moment, we just killed it and went away from it because it became too distracting. But you gotta like get good at it. You gotta put in the reps, put in the practice. Fast forward a few years later, I'm at a bigger church, a bigger team, and I'm like, you know what? It's time. Where the church wasn't running that at the time, but I'm like, this needs to happen. And maybe there was a little bit of positive pressure because a lot of my other worship leaders that I looked up to and I was like getting advice from, most of them used it. So maybe there was a little bit of positive pressure while everybody else is doing it, which isn't always a bad thing. So I start practicing with myself and I'm fighting it. And I start getting it, but then I would have people on the team that they were like, they weren't happy with this at all. But again, it's a slow grind, but it's one of those things that just, it improves you as a musician. Because then what if you go into the studio and record a song? Like, are you going to not record with a click? Your producer will not have that because how are they going to cut up the section? So I'm just saying, don't get legalistic with it and say like you have to do that in order to be a good musician. But I would say you are a good musician if you can play with the time, with the click, with the metronome. The last point I would say, and I know I'm kind of spending a lot of time here, is honestly, playing with tracks and clicks will lead to freedom. And again, I hear everybody like disagreeing with me as I say that because like, well, how does that lead to freedom? Because you have to pay attention to something that's locking you into a time. Honestly, guys, it just does. You have to take my word for it. The more you play with it and you start getting comfortable sitting in the proper time of whatever you arrive on for that song, and that becomes your constant, it will get to where you don't notice it very much because you're just used to it. And then it can give you freedom. It's just, that one's hard to explain, but just take my word for it. In my course, I talk about the equipment needed. So what I was alluding to in the introduction to this is there's a lot of different programs out there. And I remember dropping $500. I had a budget, a decent budget at the church I was at. And they were able to sign off on it. And I paid $500 for this, leading worship with Ableton course, or I forget how it was called, but like the guy, great teacher, somebody I was following with, he puts out a lot of good stuff. And so I made that big investment. That was a big investment for us to start learning Ableton and, like all the ins and outs. And he was giving you like how to organize your files and how to make arrangements and how to, create a service flow, all that very good stuff. But I started to find like all the people I had on my team were volunteers. Most people weren't very tech savvy. So as I start developing leaders and raising up leaders, and guys, that's one of my biggest callings and passions. And that's what I am all about here at Biswell Coaching. I'm trying to do that in any way, shape, or form that I can, is to develop people, invest in people, not just to lead competently, but to lead in character and to lead in cognitive health. I say all three of those because they're all important. But I was quickly realizing that, okay, how can I teach something and make it as user friendly? If my mission is to develop leaders, develop worship leaders to be sent out to other churches in need, then what will be a good, affordable, and easy way? I say easy, to teach people that. And honestly, there's no right or wrong. And I'm not saying that you couldn't teach Ableton to people. I just chose in that moment, I found Loop Community, and that became what I felt like was a lot more affordable and more user-friendly and easier for my context. So the course that I'm making available to you guys, or hoping that you guys go and purchase, to help get you up and started, it's centered around Loop Community. And there's other ones out there. There's other options out there. So I'm not saying this is the only one. It's just the one that works best for me and I have used for years. Okay. So in that course, it'll break down all the equipment needed if you choose to sign up for that course, to purchase that course. I'm giving you the snippet. I was giving you a lot of the why and some of the personal stories, and then I'm going to just give you the overall. What you'll get in this course is you'll get, there's 6 modules, and you're going to walk you through all the equipment needed to get up and running. And what's awesome about it is, like, this is very affordable. I mean, most people have an iPad or an iPhone or a Mac. Now, this program is Apple only as the recording of this episode. But, or if you don't, like, maybe your church has a budget, you can get a decent refurbished iPad for like less than $200. Okay. So it's very easy to get up and running. The iPad would probably be your biggest expense unless you splurge for, in the course, I talk about the Looptimus pedal. That's the most expensive thing if you choose to get that. It's about $300, but like it really makes it easy because you can like map things to that pedal. It's basically a big MIDI pedal, and then you can control all your tracks from your feet if you're an instrumentalist and you just don't have enough hands to do it all. But that's not a necessity. But so, like, to get up and going, like if you had an iPad and some of these cablings that you use to plug in, I mean, they're just really inexpensive. All right. So we talk about the equipment needed. We talk about how to set it up, like inside the app. We talk about the beauty of Loop Community, and maybe playback, Multitracks playback has something similar. I'm just not as familiar. I've heard a lot of good things about that as well. You got different options within Loop Community to purchase tracks. So you can all the way up to the literal artist's master track, to the next step down is the people at Loop Community or pro musicians have put together tracks that are really close to the original. And then the next step down is community tracks. So you can apply to be a seller and sell tracks that you've made from the arrangements. And then there's a bunch, like, depending on the song, there's lots of choices out there. So that even gets cheaper. And then they have a couple other options. So we walk through the different types of things you can purchase on the website, which then goes right into your Loop cloud. And you pull it up on your device and you're up and going right away. But then we talk about how that you can upload your own tracks. So, like, I have a buddy who leads at a small church here in the KC metro area. He's trying to grow his team. He's kind of like one of those people I was talking about earlier. Like, you're trying to fill in the gaps. You're doing the best with what you have, and you're working with what you have, but you're trying to grow your team, get a fuller sound and more people involved. Well, he's very talented, so he can he can create his own. He plays multiple instruments, so he goes in and he can make his own tracks in Ableton, I think is what he uses, and then you can export those as individual WAV files and then zip them together, import them into your loop cloud, and then that goes into your app, and then you can add the markers, like here's where the verse is, here's where the chorus is, and so that's a way to really save a lot of money. It creates more time, but if you're savvy enough where you can create some of your own tracks, then you can save by purchasing everything. All right. So we talk about how to do that, and then I give you kind of like how I create my set list and how I flow in between songs. And I, on any given Sunday, I'm typically doing a hybrid. So I'm not doing all backing tracks. Maybe out of 4 songs, sometimes I'm doing half of them that's a full backing track. And when I say full backing track, like depending on who I have playing, I will like take out certain instruments and keep in certain ones. But then I will, at the end of the day, at the very bare minimum, I'm typically running a pad and a click. And so you can get pads and or make your own pads. You can import those in there, and then you can play a pad with a click. And at the very bare minimum, like that adds a lot, because then you still have that time in your ear, and you're having that filler of a pad. So if you bring things down, like you have that droning pad, if you want to pray. So we talk about that. And then I give you, at the very last, I give you a bonus episode where I kind of give a practical example of, like, even from just an solo acoustic standpoint, here's how you can approach it. And so I lead a little bit of a song with just a pad and a click. And then I lead that same section again with this community track that I had purchased of In Christ Alone, pretty full. And then I even mix that, and where I take some of the percussion or the loops out, and it's just more fillers and synths and stuff. And then I lead the section of the song again that way, just to show you, here's how it can sound. Now, the last thing I will say, I feel you have to treat tracks as complementary versus supplementary. So this will be in large dependent on your front of house or the person running your sound. And so if you're the music director or the worship leader, you just need to make sure you and your sound engineer are on the same page, okay? Which can be tricky, because a lot of our sound engineers at our smaller churches, they're volunteers, and they've just been taught how to mix some sliders, and maybe they don't have full like knowledge of the soundboard and that sort of thing. So you have to teach them. But the beauty of Loop Community, for instance, is you can mix it yourself on your device, how you want it to sound. And then all their responsibility is, the front of house guy or gal is to make sure the volume is where you want it. And so what I mean by that is, you want it to be complementary. You want it to be even. I feel this is how I approach it. You want it to be even with your other instrumentation. What sometimes happens, it becomes supplementation or supplementary, where it's noticeably quieter because they think it's just going to support you. Yes, it is there to support you, but it's to complement you and to be equal. Otherwise, a lot of times what happens is that person has put in a lot of time of mixing it, and kind of planning his set around how he's going to make it sound. And if it's not where it should be in the mix, then they've kind of wasted time, because like it's not really serving anything. You can barely hear it. So at that point, it does feel like you're just singing with an accompaniment track. It needs to be complementary, not supplementary. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today, is like, and send me a comment. Like, how do you use tracks? What's your stance on tracks? What's your stance on clicks? And how does that give you freedom? One of the reasons why I made that decision to go click every time, and there's times I kill it. If we're fighting it, I'll kill it. And we don't want that kind of distraction. But the reason I choose to have a click in our ears at the bare minimum is I'm working with different musicians of different, like they're coming in at different years of experience. Sometimes they're very young and I'm just teaching them and I'm training them. Some of them are people that's been playing together or playing for a long time, but I'm trying to incorporate different musicians, meaning like I'm not playing with the same band every week, the same people every week. And so the downside to that is you don't get that cohesiveness that you can tell people that have been playing together for a long time, they just mesh well. But when you don't have that consistent playing with the same people week in, week out, you have to have something that's going to be your constant. And that's how I view that click and that guide is that's our constant. That's our centering point. And to work with different people each week, like here's what we're aligning to. And again, if we ever need to go away from it in the moment, we do that. Anyways, love to hear from you. And I would love for you to go check out that course. If you've been on the fence, you're like, you know what? I've been wanting to kind of dip my toes in the water of tracks in our Sunday morning expressions of worship, and I just been intimidated by it all. Well, go purchase this course. And here's the deal: until the end of May, since this is my very first course out there, I'm running a sale. If you go to my course and you go to purchase it and you type in first course, all one word, first course, you get it discounted at a pretty good rate. Okay. So that's kind of my, hey, I want you to try this out. I want you to take that step in your musicianship and your stewarding of your team and your congregation if you are interested in that. So go check that course out and hope you have a good rest of your week.